So we were going to talk about individuation, or finish it. Let's finish it, shall we?
Yeah, I'm totally mystified by it, actually.
Okay. Well, here's a couple of things for you.
I mean, I know what the process is, but I don't know why it works the way it works.
It's a mystery.
This is the thing. Some people don't care what other people think. You just want to go read Jung, make your decisions, and move on. You don't want to argue whether he's right or wrong or anything else, because nobody's right or wrong. You know, it's just their opinion.
That's right.
And you look at it, you can treat it like a scholar and say, okay, I know what he's about. Now I'll move on to
Okay, so
Morgana.
that's right. So what's this article? What's the significance of this? Okay, I read this article and I say, yeah, okay, James, I somewhat agree with you, but my point is, I don't think that the title is right, and the world's getting worse, okay, because for me, Jung has been about my personal individuation, okay, and for 30 years now, almost 30 years, and so I don't care about psychotherapy, okay, this group isn't about psychotherapy per se. Okay, I don't know who's right and who's wrong, and if you go to a psychotherapist, you pay your money and you take your chances because you don't know what their experience is, right? But I know for myself, in my reading of Jung and working with the materials around Jung, including this one, that I learn about myself, and it helps me. And that's why I'm leading this group, because it helps me and I think it can help other people. That's the only reason I'm doing it. And I have to admit, when I read this book, I came to it with a negative attitude. And the reason was that I had already established in my own mind that Jung was a scientist. He believed he was a scientist. And the processes that he took were unusual because he was working in the psyche, but he did it in what he perceived to be a scientific approach, okay, and it wasn't a mystical approach. I mean,
no, that's a good point, because that's like Einstein.
Right.
He's considered a scientist, but he always said imagination is more important than intelligence.
Right.
So he took it to another dimension, took science. He was still a scientist, but he thought outside the box.
Right.
And so I see Jung that way as well, so I can see what you're saying.
Well,
Right.
at least Einstein had a language to work with. Jung didn't really have a language to work with.
Right.
And in fact, what he got from Freud was so valuable to him, and he was able to take that and leverage it into something much his own.
So, I mean, for me, there were two things. One is I came at it with a bad attitude because he's trying to turn Jung into a mystic, and I don't think that Jung considered himself a mystic. He considered himself a scientist, notwithstanding the fact that he was working with the psyche, which is metaphysical. Okay, but I also took exception to Lachman using that title, okay, because it's
What title?
Jung the Mystic. Okay, I mean it'll sell books because
You have to do a very precise critique. I like that. I think you're right with that. And I hadn't thought about that.
right. But as I came to
Being a
the
layman.
but then I had your email the other day, and so I went back and looked at it, and the parts that I reread the other day, I took a bit of a different attitude toward it, okay? And so actually, I actually had read that same passage that you just read, but I didn't quite get what you had said to me in the email about it, because, and so anyway, I mean, you're absolutely right, Barbara. We have to take things from different angles, and for 15 years at least, I never read Jung directly except for this book, okay, and I just read things about him, you know, because I thought, geez, I'm never going to understand all the psychiatric stuff if these books are out about psychiatry. But they're not.
His book on psychotherapy is extremely interesting.
Yes.
Because he's not talking about practice per se.
Right.
He's talking about how all the theories collectively can work, but that you can't just fix people in a theoretical model and base your therapy on that. You have to use conversation, you have to engage yourself with them, and all this stuff. But he's differentiating the difficulties with
Right.
With the different theories of psychotherapy, and it's fascinating. It's just it's amazing writing. It really is.
Yeah, well, all of it, actually all of his writing is like that. I mean, I find pearls of wisdom on every page, maybe sometimes in every word he uses, you know.
And the scientist really comes through. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But there's an art to his science.
Right, and you know, he asked himself, what is this, when he was writing the Red Book, and his anima tells him, this is art. Okay, well, okay, yeah, it was art, because he was filling in where science left off, because science hasn't really yet addressed the psyche per se. I mean, we're better. I mean, I see these programs about Through the Wormhole and a couple of other mind series that they're having on television now, and you know, they're doing scientific research, but again, they're sort of missing the point, because they're getting details, but you know, some things you just can't explain. You know, the guys, let's take knee replacement, for example. Okay, well, a guy that just learns the nuts and bolts of how to replace somebody's knee.
A technician.
Huh?
A technician.
A technician. Okay, he might be a scientist, but he's not doing it based on imagination. Here's a blast from the past that just came to me. In 1969, I went to a recruiting seminar hosted by Ross Perot. Okay, and I thought he was the most amazing speaker I had ever heard at that time. And he said, I can take anybody and teach him brain surgery in 10 days. I mean, that's what he said. This is what he said in his speech. I'm just going to tell you a couple things that he said.
You go first.
So, you know, maybe you can teach someone the procedure to do brain surgery or whatever it is, but if something goes wrong during the procedure, they're not going to know what to do, and they won't have the background to do it. Let's go back to individuation here. So I just brought this just to show you, but it's in the Dropbox. True, what the soul imagines happens only in the mind, but what God imagines happens in reality. That's from Psychology and Alchemy.
God imagines.
Yeah. And then this is you can each have a copy of this. This is Pablo Picasso says, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. Of course, he never gave it away.
He sold it for high prices.
Right, sold it for very high prices.
Even on a napkin, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm proposing next week to talk about the art issue, which is section 4 of this book. But let's see if these things spark any thought. You know, as I come to these things and read them and either read a quote or, you know, dip into a couple pages of that book, whatever, all the time it's churning my psyche somehow, okay? And almost every time I read it, I find it useful to me in terms of my thinking. It's kind of like a kind of psychotherapy, I think. To me, that's the way it works for me. And I don't remember a lot of these things. There were things in Man and His Symbols that I obviously read in 1990, but I didn't remember until I read it again with this group. And so I don't think we have to become terrific Jung scholars, but I think we can find things that are useful in our own lives in many ways, not only in mental health, but in politics and art. That's why I want to talk about art next week and what he says. And I actually wrote an article about art myself called Archetype in Art. And so it just helps to do it. And whether you do it in a very organized way or disorganized way, I find a lot of wisdom here. And when I started to read the Red Book, I decided I would tweet it out. Okay, and so I was taking like a paragraph with 5 sentences, and because in order to get something, the beginning at the top, you have to start with the end, right? So I'm putting these sentences in from the last one to the first one, and I'm realizing, son of a gun, this makes as much sense backwards as it does forwards. And then so that they would be in the right order once people look back at my Twitter feed, but I was just finding that the pieces that I was finding that I thought had wisdom in them, they actually make as much sense in reverse order. I find more Jung quotes than anything else out there, really, but I mean, I suppose somebody like Winston Churchill had a few, but but I don't know who has more quotes than Carl Jung. Nietzsche, yeah.
Can I ask you something about your experience with individuation?
Sure.
Skip.
I'm still doing it, but go ahead.
Well, are you using dream interpretation and active imagination and all these tools?
I have not been using active imagination.
You have not been?
Not been since I did my novel. Okay. And the reason for that was that novel poured out of me, and it was like being there. Okay. I mean, in other words, I was visioning the same way Jung was describing visioning in the Red Book. I was having similar experiences, okay, of actually talking to vision figures and that sort of thing in my visioning. And after I finished it, I was frankly frightened. I didn't know what I had, and I just didn't dare to do it that way again by myself. Okay, but I have done tandem active imaginations only with women. Those have gone in varying degrees of success, from 3 interactions to one that lasted 8 months, and had.
What is a tandem imagination?
Well, the way I envision doing it, and I probably have done it with maybe 6 or 7 different women over time. The one that I was most successful with was a black woman writer up in Philadelphia, and the way we did it, I start with a scene, and the scene is something like this. We're on a beach together, and there's a ladder, a circus type ladder up to the sky. You can't see where the end of it is. There's a speedboat that's pulled up to the beach with the engine up out of the water, and a little runabout pulled up at the beach. And then there's the beach, and it's sunset, and the sky is dark. what happens next. Okay.
Yeah, we used to do that in the 60s, 70s.
Did you?
Yeah, we'd go to parties. And we would start with like a storyboard,
Mm-hmm.
little squares or something.
Right.
And
That would be interesting.
someone would start a story, and then you'd hand it to someone else, and they would continue. Everybody I hung out with nothing but artists, musicians, and so everyone was creative in some way, and everyone would build on the story, and so we would have these.
Right.
So did you write it down?
Yeah. And so we exchanged emails, and one of them lasted about 6 weeks. One lasted only like 2 or 3 exchanges, but always by email, right? This happens, what's next? Okay, and then the other party does what's next, and then you respond to that. And what happens is you get extremely deep, okay? You get very, very deep. And with this black writer that I did it with, oh my God, we finally got to an area that I just had to back out of. I just wasn't comfortable with it anymore. But you have to follow a rule if you're going to do something like this, which is, the rule is if the other party doesn't respond, no questions asked, it's over. Okay, and so as long as the other party responds, it keeps going. Okay, now this woman told me 2 or 3 years later that she considered it a precious experience in her life, and that she kept printouts of it in her drawer as a precious thing. I don't even know her name anymore. I don't remember her name right now. I probably could find it, but
What do you mean by deep? You're talking about.
I'm talking about getting into
Things
visions that were frightening me. Okay, and so my point to you is that we're talking about depth psychology here. Okay, psychotherapists, they don't do depth psychology anymore. Okay, they do drugs. Okay, and they do very superficial stuff.
Patchwork.
Pardon? Yeah, patchwork. They say, "Oh, you're depressed. Here, take this." Okay.
Or get over it.
Or get over it, or whatever it is. But they don't.
More. Take
Yeah.
twice a dose now.
Yeah, but they want to give you a pill to solve your problem, but they don't get into what really is causing the problem. Okay, which is the difference with depth
Have you
psychology.
been in any therapies? Like
I
marriage
don't
counseling or anything?
A long time ago, but
Where
my
they'll have a
holistic doctor is
technique
a
and-
life coach. He uses a lot of
Right.
Jung.
Well, some people just use, a lot of psychologists use techniques. They'll be like communication techniques or some technique, and they'll want you to go off and perform those techniques and then come back and talk about the experience. And it's so sterile.
Yeah,
Well,
no, the mind is not
they
that way.
they cause movement, okay, but so does dream analysis, okay. In other words, when people are in therapy, they tend to have a lot more dreams. Dreams start to come up, and as a matter of fact, there's a joking story about the Jung Institute that you can't graduate from the Jung Institute until you've had the right dream.
Oh, it's a joke.
Who knows whether it's true or not? I don't know, but
That's funny.
it sounds like it's true. Okay, it might be true.
Probably is if you're doing your dreams and that all the time.
Did you, if I heard you right, did you say that with this tandem imagination, you said it provokes more dreams?
Well, it did provoke more dreams. It does provoke dreams, and it is a dream in itself. It's a vision in itself. And I've tried to do by myself active imagination, and I can get into it a little bit, but I just can't get engaged in it.
The question I have for you about active imagination is, how do you know your ego isn't really involved
Well, you don't. I
in
mean,
creating this image that's not really an unconscious thing?
well, at the beginning, it probably is. Okay, I mean, honestly, I'd have to say it probably is. But, because when I give this scenario of the ladder, the speedboat, or the beach, and the sunset, and so on, that, I'm asking my AI partner to say, okay, pick one. What do you want? Where do you want to go? And then it evolves from there. So, almost certainly the original image comes from my ego. Right? But once you start to do it back and forth, you start getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And as I say, that
Does this help you individually?
it surely does. Sure. Yeah.
It throws things out.
What if
It's
you've got
pre-association.
What if you've got a person or persons involved in this that have psychological problems?
Well, that's why I pulled out.
Okay.
Because I got to a point where I just was not comfortable with it anymore. Okay, and maybe we all have something down there in the cellar that isn't so good. I don't know. I can't say, but I don't
Good
know
or
what.
bad is ego judgment.
Pardon?
Good and bad are ego judgments.
Right, and
The unconscious doesn't have those.
right, and so you just have to. I remember the images we were having at the end, and I just wasn't comfortable with them.
Do you have things like animals and objects and
All
everything?
kinds of things, and
Thoughts?
huh?
Thoughts?
Right. Yep.
Philosophies?
Everything's coming up, sure. And there's talking animals, and there's actually all the symbology that you find in mythology. Those kinds of creatures do emerge, and so, but people also in analysis have a lot of things coming up in their dreams. Okay.
When I was a kid, my family's, our backyard had a hill. It's about like that. A part of it was, and I would go lay on that hill, and I would ask questions, and I'd wait for something to respond. So if the birds flew by that way, it meant one thing. If they flew by that way, it meant another thing. If the tree up above me shook, anything. There were so many things, and I would just be aware of all this stuff, and I would immerse myself in that as a kid. That's why active imagination didn't, though this was probably active imagination,
Sure.
but active imagination where I read a book and said, okay, I'm gonna do this, I can't, that wouldn't work for me.
It doesn't work that
slide
way.
into something
But-
that I discovered on my own.
But these are all techniques to get through to your emotional life, right? And that's what individuation is partially about, is getting through to your emotional life. And so you can do something as simple as flip a coin. You pick something and you don't know whether you want A or B. You flip a coin and pick the thing that you want to come up. And when you look at the result, if you want to go 2 out of 3, your answer is the opposite. It's as simple as that, and it works every time. Okay, it works every time.
Would it work on a roulette wheel?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not as definitive on a roulette wheel because there are many more choices. But if you're trying to make a yes/no decision,
I mean, black,
Any-
red. Black, red.
I mean, any yes/no decision, just flip a coin and say, heads or tails, whichever, and then whatever comes up, if you want to go best 2 out of 3, your answer is the other side, what didn't come up. Right. And so, I mean, I'm not highly recommending that, you drop into a tandem active imagination with someone. Okay, I haven't done it for about 15 years myself because I haven't found the right partner to do it with. I mean, I've tried a few.
What's the criterion, in your opinion?
Well, I've tried to do it with a few Jungians, and Actually started with one, and I always want to do it with a woman because I want to have the animal side in the process.
Well, it's ultimately pretty intimate.
And it's intimate.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's very intimate, and
So you've got to be with somebody you trust.
yeah, it has to be very trusting, and it was interesting, but we just got to a point where it sort of ended. Okay, it didn't end because it was something woo woo. It just ended. The story came to an end, right? And but there was a story for 6 weeks going
Did you
along.
see archetypes in these stories?
Absolutely, sure. Yeah, definitely.
So you know what the archetypes are. Then you've studied the archetypes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Where does Jung discuss those and characterize those?
The
Where does Jung characterize those? I know he talks about animus.
well,
but
I mean, you should read Archetypes in the Collective Unconscious.
that's one of his collected works.
Yeah, it's
It's one of his volumes.
one of the early ones. That came out something like 1919 or something like that.
That's very primal stuff, then, isn't it?
Oh, it surely is, and and fundamentally, when we get down to it, the main teaching that Jung has is this teaching that also Esther Harding put at the beginning of her book, the first paragraph of her book, which is, it's either instinct or it's civilization, and if we go only by instinct, then it's just fight or flight, and it's the death in the primordial swamps has no meaning. It's just life being life, and it's very it's actually pretty ugly. I mean, we've been watching these osprey cams on the internet the last 4 years. The female osprey come back, and then there's the mating, and you actually see it all in real time on your computer, and then 40 days later she lays the eggs, and then 40 days later they hatch, and then in 2 months these birds are full-size osprey, and so it's really an amazing thing to watch, but it's also pretty ugly because one time we're watching, there were 2 osprey babies up in Maine at one of these cameras, and 2 eagles came down and took the 2 osprey babies right out of the nest before they ever flew, and then it was over. Then all of a sudden, okay, this is the Audubon's website, right? So this is at their main camp in Maine. And all of a sudden, they're halfway into the season, and the naturalists have been talking about all the things. Yeah, and then all of a sudden, bam! It's over for the year because they're gone. And this year, I think the one out in the Chesapeake Bay, it's actually over on the Miles River, but that they lost a baby to an eagle this year, and we've watched it out off our area lands, and they the osprey and the eagles are just in a constant air war all year, and so that's the instinctual side. Now humans, we figured out that if we made certain agreements among ourselves, that we could live differently, we could live better. So we're not perfect yet. Okay, we're not perfect yet. But it's that play between instinct and civilization that is always beating us up.
The question is man a fallen angel or risen ape?
That's right. Yeah, is man a fallen angel or risen ape? Okay. So let me read you a couple of these passages here. Okay. It was only after the illness. Now he's talking about, I think, when he was sick in 1944, he had a heart attack. was only after the illness that I understood how important it is to affirm one's destiny. In this way, we forge an ego that does not break down when incomprehensible things happen. An ego that endures the truth, and that is capable of coping with the world and with fate. Then, to experience defeat is also to experience victory. Nothing is disturbed, neither inwardly nor outwardly. One's own continuity has withstood the current of life and of time. But that can come to pass only when one does not meddle inquisitively with the workings of fate. Okay, that's from Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which is one of the books that I would like to read in this group next, actually. Because the Memories, Dreams, Reflections is his autobiography of his psychic development. Okay, he never wanted to do a history of his life, you know, on July 25th, 1925, I did X. No, he didn't want that, but he wanted to talk about the evolution of his psyche, and it's very interesting. It's available on Audible also. One more short one here, and then we're going to put Individuation to death, or not to death, but aside. Okay, the aim of individuation is nothing less than to divest the self of the false wrappings of the persons on the one hand, and of the suggestive power of primordial images on the other. And that's from Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious. And that's in the book you have, Collected Works 7, paragraph 269. Okay. This book, the quotations of Carl Jung, is a terrific book. It's about that thick, but it's got all these pithy little things in it. And, you know, individuation is something we'll be talking about as long as we're doing this. And so I don't think we have to beat it to death right now.
And there's no definitive answer anyway.
And there's no definitive.
Everyone's going to individuate differently.
Precisely.
So there's going to be a different mix all the time.
Right.
Except for the archetypal currents that feed into it.